Hey, welcome back to another episode of After Hours. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about how our modern worldview has utterly changed the meaning of certain words, namely the word nature. Now, when you think of nature, you think of national parks, evergreen trees, oaks, flowers, the green stuff that grows outside. That's nature. But in its original conception, the Latin word naturae was actually derived from an older Greek word, which actually literally meant to give birth or the growing or producing. And while, of course, that encapsulates nature as we know it today, it is funny how that word has become completely divorced from the other side of nature, which is the growing and producing of humans. Now, today, in today's modern political spectrum, you could say that people that are the biggest proponents of environmentalism or nature as we know it are also the biggest proponents of abortion or choice, as they call it. And it's an interesting note because that is actually taking that original word and attaching an ideology that is, I would say, that is half true, because of course we want to preserve, the environment in which we live. We should be good stewards of the place that we inhabit. But on the flip side, it wants to, or it is a proponent of eradicating life in the human form in favor of what they would call the natural world. But again, I'd like to point out that the natural world, naturae, there was no distinction between nature and humans as such. The birth, the reproducing, it was encapsulating. So today you'll hear debates about, human nature. But prior to, the modern use of human nature, nature in itself, naturae, it encapsulated human nature as part of the meaning of the word. For instance, if we look at literature such as Dante's Inferno, or even laws that exist actually still in certain states, I think they're antiquated laws that people don't follow. There are things that are called crimes against nature. Now, what is a crime against nature? Is it ExxonMobil pumping oil in the Pacific Ocean? Is it, like in Fern Gully, cutting down trees, or in the Lorax, making too many sneeds? No, a crime against nature is things that are against nature, human nature. So sodomy would fall into that category. And why does sodomy fall into that category? Well, because it's a primarily hedonistic endeavor that there is no producing of life. It is an activity that is solely used by humans for hedonistic pleasure, and therefore is a crime against nature. Same with uh, intercourse with animals would be a crime against nature because it goes against the natural order of how we were created. Now, again, I'd like to point out that in today's modern age, there's a debate amongst the postmodern crowd. And oftentimes, it's something like, does human nature exist? And that question, behind that question is kind of this idea that, you know, are we living by guidelines that we ourselves have constructed through the years? Have we been brainwashed by things like, the Bible or religion into adopting these values when in reality human nature is a malleable thing? We could We could theoretically construct a society with a totally different set of principles. And I would argue that right now that is the experiment. In today's modern age, we want to subvert the natural values that we actually are born with and that are given to us by God. But we want to experiment, and we are experimenting with subverting those with unnatural values, things like transgenderism, things such as relationships with the same sex, things that do not produce life, going back to that old meaning of the word nature, naturae, to produce life, to give birth. These things are sterile, and while some may argue, well, this makes me happy, we can see that the results of those things are nothing that moves the human race forward. And it's also interesting to note that is actually part of the concept behind some of these movements. The idea that there are too many people in the world, and this is almost kind of a self-inflicted population control. Well, we don't need more people in the world. We're gonna adopt. It's better to be in a same-sex relationship and adopt a child, right, than it is to produce a child in this terrible world with all the terrible things going on. And I would argue that right now, the postmodern experiment, the experiment of transgenderism, same-sex relationships, and basically just the total abolition of traditional values, hierarchies, and traditional understanding of nature that is tied inseparably from human nature is the experiment. So with that, I'll see you on the next one.